Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. Good afternoon. Welcome. We're actually going to get started by the graciousness of our guest of honor about 2 or 3 minutes ahead of schedule, which is great. Give us a maximum amount of time for our conversation. Good afternoon. Welcome. As most of you know, I'm Craig Snyder, the president of the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia. We're delighted to be hosting Mr. Dimon today and for our ongoing partnership with Jpmorgan Chase as generous supporters of the Council's educational programs. In addition to this wonderful and important event for the Council, today is otherwise also a notable date for our organization as we publicly announce the launch of our new and much improved website. I want to invite you all to explore the new wacphila.org. We think it's a much more user-friendly and contemporary form. In a world that is awash in noise and clutter, we've made a very conscious effort to declutter in order to present you what is most important and accessible in all of our areas of activities. Our web redesign was an all-hands-on-deck effort for the small council staff, but I want to ask all of you to take a moment and join me in giving a special thanks to our Vice President of Programs, Haley Boyle, who led and drove this important project. So, thank you, Haley. This new website, as well as other areas of growth that you're going to be seeing in this organization, are being made possible by contributors to the Council's Rising to the Occasion fundraising campaign for our upcoming 70th anniversary. Please stay tuned for more information about the anniversary and this really crucial development effort for our next 70 years. I'm also thrilled to announce here today that the first of what will become a special series of programs as a part of our 70th anniversary celebration, and that is going to be on Wednesday, December 5th, when the Council will partner with St. Joseph's University to take a deep dive look at the vital and much confounding relationship between the United States and Russia. That program will be keynoted by former U.S. Ambassador to the Russian Federation, Michael McFaul, who many of you may know has been really personally at the center of recent controversies. This joins an already packed fall podium program, also including former United States Secretary of the Navy, John Lehman, and very excited about this, the longest American resident of outer space, astronaut Scott Kelly, a program in cooperation with the Franklin Institute, and a program with a leading public intellectual on foreign affairs, Robert Kagan, whose new book, The Jungle Grows Back, is being talked about both by fans and critics as one of the most important foreign policy books of our time. So getting to our main event today, it is my privilege and pleasure to introduce Jamie Dimon, the chairman and CEO of Jpmorgan Chase, one of the oldest financial institutions in the United States, with assets of $2.6 trillion and operations worldwide. Mr. Dimon began his finance career at American Express in 1982 and later helped build the modern-day Citigroup. He then became chairman and CEO of Jpmorgan Chase soon after joining in 2004. Mr. Dimon, as you all know, is universally acknowledged as one of the leading voices not only of America's financial industry, but indeed of American business more broadly. He has graciously agreed to sit in conversation with me on some pressing issues concerning our region, America, and the world economy. And then the last portion of our program will feature some questions from you. So if you have a question, please write it on one of the index cards you'll find at your tables. Staff will be circulating shortly to collect them and bring them to me. So with that, please join me in welcoming to the stage Jamie Dimon. Thank you, sir. So I want to start with what brings you to Philadelphia today, and specifically why Jpmorgan Chase is making investments in Philadelphia and other cities like Detroit, Chicago, DC, when some other institutions are retrenching.
Right. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming here. So we do business here. We do investment banking, we do commercial banking, we do private banking, we do credit card, we do mortgages, and now we're filling out the retail system. We're going to open 50 branches. Those 50 branches, 20% will be in LMI neighborhoods. Obviously, have 300 jobs directly, and then we love our business. And so these branches, still 1 million people visit branches a day. Their format changed a little bit. But when you bring the branch, we bring in mortgage specialists, small business specialists, investment advisors, educate the population, financial education, et cetera. It's permanent. We're not going to expand or not expand. It'll take a while. It's a new market for us. And the reason we're doing it now is that the regulators for years didn't want banks to expand. And so I've been waiting to do this for 10 years. And so we're thrilled to be here. And we hope that Jpmorgan Chase is a great citizen for 100 years in Philadelphia and helps develop a lot of the neighborhoods here. When we come in, we also do a tremendous amount of small business lending, mortgage lending, LMI, philanthropy. I just spent a little time in Paseo Verde and funding affordable housing and entrepreneurs of color and a whole bunch of different things to help lift up the community.
Fantastic. So turning to the national economy, there's a meaningful risk that there are going to be some bad political and strategic events on the horizon. It is possible that the president is going to be impeached. It is possible that there could be armed hostilities in the Persian Gulf or on the Korean Peninsula. There are lots of real serious threats that seem more real now than they have in recent years. And then you have macroeconomic trends like our budget deficits, even in peacetime. So in the context of the longest bull market in American history, when you have this kind of potential bad news, why do you believe investors should not today be fleeing the equity market?
So I don't completely agree with all the things you said. So the United States is the most prosperous economy that the world's ever seen. And it continues to have these natural blessings of food, water, and energy, the Atlantic and the Pacific. It's got the founding fathers' blessings of free enterprise, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, a society that constantly adjusts. We've got the best universities in the world, a lot of the best companies in the world. We have an unbelievable hand. We had 10 years of growth, but it's 20% in total. It should have been 40%, okay? And it's been really anemic. My own view is it's been anemic because of bad policy decisions on our part. We spent $5 trillion on war. I've yet to see an economist put that in their calculation of why productivity is low. That's a lot of money. Okay, we've become terrible at infrastructure. We don't graduate kids from inner city schools. A lot of kids who graduate are not job ready. We have too many felons who can't get jobs. We have an opioid problem. There's a long series of things. We fix now business competitive taxes, and please separate business competitive. It's foolish not to be competitive globally in business from individual. And so, so my own view is that and the economy is quite strong. Housing is in short supply, people going back to the workforce, the financial system is really well capitalized, the leverage is much less than it was in 07 or 08, the rest of the world is growing. It may hit the highest growth level ever this year. You wouldn't know that by reading the papers, would you? Unemployment in the United States may hit the lowest it has been since World War II. So the economy is just humming along. Capital expenditure going up, confidence has skyrocketed, whether you like the president or not. Consumer and business confidence has skyrocketed to almost all-time highs. Now, put some of the things you said. That's always been true. Okay, we've had crises. Hell, we've had Middle East crises. We've had Middle East crises like that burnt out. Hello, can you hear me now? We've had Middle East crises 7 times. We've had war in Afghanistan, Iraq. Russia's had battles with China. China's had battles with India. India's had battles with Pakistan. Okay, we had Kosovo and stuff like that. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, Iraq 1, Iraq 2. There's tons of noise out there. And all that noise has almost never affected the global economy. Nice to talk about, and there's a reason. Those parts of the world are a very small part of the global economy. I do agree that you got to compare. Can they just leave it the way they had it? I do agree that they can just compare. Friction levels are higher than normal. So between Brexit and trade and Iran, so I think they're higher. I think there's a higher chance of a policy error. There's a higher chance of something wrong. And I do want to point, we've had 2 prior impeachments, and by all evidence had nothing to do with the market or the economy. So I think people talk a lot of that, but it doesn't mean it's going to derail the economy. Something will derail it. It may very well be, the extensive amount of kind of noise out there and, people's confidence levels drop and we screw up trade somehow. So I'm not saying it won't happen. I just don't think it's an automatic that'll happen right away. What we see is a strength in the economy. I think it's very possible the economy simply took longer to strengthen to its natural growth rate of 3%.
So given the good news that you said, why aren't we seeing higher wage growth? Would be natural in a tight labor market.
Okay, can you hear me? That's much better, thank you.
Okay.
I don't know why someone can't invent good ones of these. Seriously, Silicon Valley should work on that.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same reason. Very anemic growth, anemic job growth, anemic wages. That's all. And now that things have accelerated, we're seeing wage growth. It looks like it's late in the cycle. It's just like the cycle may have a couple more years to go. And now you're seeing wage growth. Inflation is 2.7%. Wages went up 2.6%. So I think you're probably seeing now. There is some truth that, and I think tax reform will help do that. A bunch of things will help do that, but we need wage growth. I don't know about you all, but when I travel around the country now, I now have business people complain to me about, I can't get the people I need, I have to pay more. Well, that's what you wanted, wasn't it? It's called a recovery.
What about productivity growth, right, which seems to be more of a long-term challenge? In spite the fact that we are surrounded by innovation, apparent innovation, doesn't seem to be translating into productivity.
Again, I don't agree. So the numbers are totally screwed up if you ever dig into them. If you want to, it'll bore the hell out of you. Dig into how we calculate these numbers. Mm-hmm. And you will say, they're not falsely calculated. They're just hard to estimate GDP, inflation. Like they don't count, they have all these adjustments for inflation. The fact they can adjust for the fact that your tire now goes 20,000 miles and not 10 at the same price. That they can adjust for. They can't adjust for new products. They can't adjust for the fact that you can watch a movie while you're in the airport on your iPhone. So they don't adjust. So productivity, how many people in this room are in business aren't getting 2% productivity? Almost none of you. You're all getting 2%. Agriculture, I remember years ago they said, agriculture, it can't get 2% more. It's been getting like 1.7% last decade too. Because, satellites and farm and GMO and food and stuff like that. I personally think that it's been better than people think. But part of what I said that slowed us down, we spent $4 trillion on war. That's like throwing money in the ocean. We don't graduate kids, so we can't get these kids into jobs. Infrastructure, and you're going to laugh when I say this, we put a man on the moon in 8 years. It takes 12 years to get the permits to rebuild a broken bridge. What the hell happened to us? So this infrastructure, that one thing alone, it takes 12 years. In some countries, it takes 2 or 3. And that means the risk of investing is higher, and the actual investment will not be 100 million, it'll be 500 million. The Corps of Engineers reviews the average project 3 or 4 times. This is true for bridges, tunnels, hospitals, FAA. So I go on and on. So productivity is everywhere, and then we have this what I call negative productivity because we've had bad policy. And I'm fairly convinced of that. I can't prove it. If you're an economist in the room, start working on that. But businesses are still hustling and getting stuff done and growing and expanding.
Let's talk about another area where a lot of people think the numbers are just not being accurately reflected, and that's income inequality. So there's a school of thought that says that America is an outlier, that we're becoming a new Gilded Age. And there's also a school of thought that says, no, if you actually look beneath the numbers, we're really in the same place as Germany, which is held up as a standard. Do you have a view about economic inequality at state? And what do you think the role of American business is, including your own company, in addressing economic inequality?
Yeah, so there's several truths here. America is not worse than most of the other places. That's not true. In fact, most of the other places I go, a lot of the money, I'll sit at a table and they'll be talking American compensation and stuff like that, and almost everyone at the table inherited their money, and a lot, not a little. Company after company after company, there's a lot to be passed through. So it's not true that we're not that different than some of these countries. We're different than France, we're different than a bunch of others, but it is a problem, okay? Because what happened in the United States, and we've dug deep into these numbers, middle class incomes have stayed flat for about 15 years. This happened before with these short cycles, long cycles. The lower end is definitely not kept up. It's kept up with transfer payments. So if you include all the government transfer payments, but that isn't a healthy society. I mean, I don't think a person is happy because that's what they have to do. to live okay, to get food stamps for the kids and stuff like that. Most people prefer to have a healthy job. My own view is that slow growth made middle class worse, predominantly, and we don't do a good job of training people, which hurt people coming into the middle class. Okay, so think of there are tons of jobs out there. The other thing about the middle class, and someone just did it, this is why numbers, you got to study numbers, really study them. The baby boom is retiring. The average person who's working, income has been going up. The higher earning people are retiring. The average is the same, but the person in the workforce is going up. So again, these numbers are almost always wrong. But the low end is quite clear to me that minimum wage is not a living wage. So it used to be that when you worked on a farm, as a farmhand, you kind of got a living wage. You worked in a GM plant in the 50s and 60s, that was going to earn you enough money. You started unskilled to buy a house, put your kids to school, get a car. That's not true anymore. I think that may be a permanent problem because of the value of high skills and stuff like that. My own view is that we should fix it, again, two ways. Proper training, high school kids getting out with apprenticeships and jobs that pay in robotics, coding, a whole bunch of stuff. It's a national emergency, which we have not fixed. Another reason we have low productivity. And I'd have a negative income tax. I think we're making a mistake to think, I want that person who starts that job to have a living wage. And so today, we have a little bit of a negative income tax. A woman who works, who's single but with 2 children, if she's earning $14,000 a year minimum wage, she'll get a check from the government for $6,000. A single man, no children, will get a check for $400. I think we should give almost double or triple that program. Make work pay for these folks, give them a living wage. Remember, that first job, that first rung leads to the second rung. You have better social outcomes, you'll have less drug problems, less divorced families, more. It'll be good for everybody, and yeah, it'll cost a bunch of money. And you should pay the people in this room, and you'll be okay. So if we fix society's ills, you're going to be far better off. So we do have an issue. We got to face it. We need good policy to fix it. Otherwise, you're just not going to fix it.
Let's go down one level in terms of that policy, right? So you have the idea of a negative income tax. You have the idea of a guaranteed minimum income, similar but not identical. And some people are now talking about a guaranteed job. Where would you stand in that spectrum?
It's easy to say these things, but if you have a guaranteed job and you have the program badly designed, it will fail. Okay, and I don't think, and we do have, we basically have something that's called universal basic income. It's called welfare. It's a terrible way to do it. Like, I read somewhere that a person who they want to take care of their family, there's like 30 or 40 different welfare programs. You can get up to $43,000 a year or something like that. It's like a full-time job, going back and forth. Just give them $30,000 or something. And then they say, well, the mother may waste it. Most of them won't. They'll take care of their family. And so I'm not, I think of it as we should have properly defined safety nets, which we don't. Something like a negative income tax for people working, which we kind of have a little bit of. And the job has got to be skills. If you build bridges to nowhere, you're hurting. If you make loans to people that can't pay it back, you're hurting. If you give people guaranteed jobs and the jobs are worthless, it's hurting. It will make things worse and not make them better. So if you want to do it, at least design it properly. Really think carefully. And most things talk about infrastructure, education. This is nothing to do with Democrats or Republicans. So for all the people in this room who you go home and you yell and scream at the other one, most good policy is not a damn thing to do with either party. It's about good public policy. And we need to fix that. And if we don't, and people are fixing it locally, by the way, so mayors are doing it. Working with business locally. That's one of the ways to fix it.
I want to go to what a lot of people have been talking about lately, the 10th anniversary of the financial crisis. With hindsight, can you sort of readdress your view of why the policy choice was to bail out the financial industry rather than the distressed homeowners individually?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what they did and why they did it. And there would have been other options in hindsight. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. I personally think that President Obama, President Bush, Tim Geithner, Hank Paulson, and Ben Bernanke in that crisis did the right thing because they realized we had a disaster. Okay? And remember, before they bailed out a bank, 100 mortgage brokers went bankrupt. Okay? Bear Stearns was basically bailed out by us. Okay? AIG failed. Lehman, the investment bank, failed, and eventually it got to a bank. And by the way, they gave a lot of money to homeowners. The banks gave a lot of money to homeowners. There was a lot of that just through the normal course of action that people took. And I'm talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, by the way. But their view was that if people start, and it was just banks, you all stop lending into the market. You stop buying commercial paper, repo, corporate bonds, equities, and stuff like that. Prices collapsed, collateral values collapsed. We were looking at the face of Great Depression. So they came up with a whole bunch of things, the good old American way to try to fix it. TARP was one, but what really saved it was the Fed putting a mounted wall of liquidity, not to the banks, to you, to the marketplace, financing commercial paper, the Treasury bailing out money market funds and stuff like that, which could have taken our system down. So they did the right thing, but of course, bailing out banks created this. It's going to be 25 years before banks are forgiven for what happened. And also, it became part of the political narrative that all banks were bailed out, which wasn't true. But it was a statement. All the banks were bailed out. All the banks were bailed out. No, the banks were trying to help. And some were bailed out, by the way, and then some acted badly. So I felt terrible for Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner when some of these people who really were bailed out went ahead and paid huge sums of money to their senior executives. I mean, you want to leave a bad taste in people's mouth? Do that. Be an ingrate, take the money and say it wasn't my fault. And so I think some banks acted badly, some acted good, and all that stuff like that. But they did the right thing. In hindsight, I would have done it differently. I would have put the mountain of liquidity first and capital only to the banks who needed it afterwards. So there would have been much more Old Testament justice. There would have been more failures, but they would have been okay. But I hate hindsight. Those folks were in the boxing ring, man. They were trying to save this country, and they did. So I give them full credit for that.
What do you feel about the post-crash regulatory environment? Has the situation been made less likely to reoccur, or are there gaps? Was too much done?
No, listen, you needed reform. Okay, Basel II allowed investment banks to leverage up 2 or 3 times more than they had before. Okay, obviously the mortgage business, somewhat propagated by government policy, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which remember went bankrupt, biggest financial disaster of all time, and then mortgage brokers and investment banks and the mortgages had to be fixed. You needed more capital, more liquidity, more transparency. You needed the government to have the authority to take over investment bank, and they did not. The legal authority to take over Lehman. They had the legal authority to take over WAMU, which we bought. Okay, and so what did they do? They passed up more capital, more liquidity, more transparency, the legal authority to take over Lehman, which meant they could have taken over and had it and managed it in an orderly way. But Lehman wouldn't happen again. And again, people don't look at facts. Lehman today would have had 2.5 times as much equity capital as it had back then, which would be enough to stand the storm. They would have had twice as much liquidity, which would be enough to stand the storm. And if they did go bankrupt, they would have had something like $100 billion of debt, which would convert to equity at the second of bankruptcy, making the most overcapitalized firm in the country. And the government could take them over and manage them. So what happened with Lehman was a disorderly unwind of hundreds of billions of dollars of assets in the marketplace. Wouldn't happen again. So they fixed it. It doesn't mean they didn't go too far in other things, lack of coordination, duplication, just bureaucratic stuff. Some of them were thoughtless. They damaged lower income Americans and mortgages. Some of that stuff needs to be fixed. But in general, they fixed the problem. They should be taking a victory lap. How many of you think we should have stayed in the Paris Climate Accord? I do. Most of you probably do. But the Paris Climate Accord had no teeth. And it was a statement. And so America has reduced its CO2 by 20%. What did China commit to? You probably didn't read the Paris Climate Accord. They made no commitment at all. They can increase it at will for the next 15 years. As did India. Now, you can make a lot of the argument that's fair. They're a developing nation, stuff like that, and that we should help pay for that. We've already polluted by our development. My point is it had no teeth. With the American public, if you really, and this is why having those things kind of create this false sense that we did something. If you want to do something, you need a CO2 tax. That's it. And we don't have the political strength to do it. We can't raise our gas tax. We don't have the political strength to do it. So all those people who want to do good for the environment, fight for that. You do the Paris Climate Accord, didn't fix the problem. And it's unfortunate. We think we did, and we didn't. I'm not saying we shouldn't have stayed in, but it leads to more bad public policy. What question are we on before?
Yes.
Talking interrupted. Oh, I'm saying it does put stuff into shadow banking. Think of CLOs and money market funds, and the mortgage business has been taken over mostly by mostly 80%, 70% by non-banks. There's a lot of leverage lending by non-banks, by private equity. It's not all bad. I'm not arguing there's anything wrong with it, but that, if it goes unexamined, we'll end up with a problem sometime down the road. So, and the regulators know that, but they have to keep their eye on that, because what they do here just pops up over there.
The other concern that people have raised on this sort of 10th anniversary business is that the tools that were used to get us out of the last crash may be no longer available if something else terrible were to happen. Right? The Fed has this balance sheet. The deficit is already high. Do you share those concerns?
No. They took away a couple of the tools, but the FDIC, they can take over all those companies. Okay, the Fed can still lend against good collateral under the Fed window and stuff like that. The FDIC would take over a company. If a company ever lost money, you know who pays the FDIC? No, we do.
Yeah.
Not the public. It gets charged back to the bank. So we've paid $10 billion in the FDIC to make up for failure of banks. So the system was set up. There were a couple of things that were taken away that may make it harder for policymakers. But my experience is government, when the time comes, they'll do what they got to do.
I want to turn back in a way to what you were talking about, sort of structural reforms that might make the system more fair. There's a bill that's been introduced by Senator Warren, very sweeping proposal for a federal charter for large corporations, mandating 40% of board seats be workers. Some people view that as a proposal for the greatest theft in American history. Others say this is how you save capitalism. Do you have a view on her proposal?
So capitalism, and we've never had free market capitalism. My whole life has been very regulated. It's kind of a modified market. What you need for freedom, that you get to choose and have free enterprise, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, free enterprise. Free enterprise is a wonderful, beautiful thing that's accomplished more on this planet than almost anything else. These big companies, okay, what do they do? And I'm talking about all the companies in this room. We do all these things you're supposed to. We pay our people well. We give them medical, dental, healthcare, retirement. Hell, we give them Pilates and massages if it makes them feel good. Okay, we retrain them when something goes wrong. We help their families. We're usually hugely philanthropic. We do all the things that you say people should do in society. Participate in communities, serve on boards, participate with their own money and the company money and stuff like that. There are issues in corporate governance, and we've pointed out, I'm against giving short-term earnings guidance, okay? And the BRT came out again, the Business Roundtable from DC, because I think that does put management's back up against the wall. Not in that quarter, cumulatively over time. And it can corrupt what happens inside a company. We got to meet our targets. No, you don't. I don't care about my target. We don't have targets. Tell your shareholders the truth, and these branches aren't going to make money for us for a couple of years. So what? We know the MPV will be good over time, and we'll figure out a way to do it. So there are issues in corporate governance, and they should be faced on. There are issues on transparency, litigation. I go the other way around. We've gone from 8,000 public companies to 4,000. I think that's a good thing. There are some good reasons, like you can stay private longer, you could get private capital, and there are a lot of bad reasons. Companies don't want to be public, which means you don't have a chance to buy them. There's a huge cost to being public from all these, some of the, Sarbanes-Oxley. I'm not against any rules, Sarbanes-Oxley. Litigation is capricious and arbitrary. And when you're in the public eye, you also tend to get attacked by public figures. So, to me, you want a healthy economy, a healthy environment, proper corporate governance. And I'm not going to comment on the specifics of a politician.
Great. I'm going to turn to questions from the audience. First one, what keeps you up at night?
Well, we mentioned some of those stuff out there.
Yeah.
I think those are legitimate things to worry about. But the biggest one to me, and I've mentioned bad public policy, that I was worried, cyber. I think that we are wholly unprepared for the cyber war that is effectively already taking place. And we have to protect ourselves. We don't have the laws in place. The military should be freed up to be more offensive, in my opinion. There's got to be much more sharing between government and businesses. Businesses are very vulnerable, and I'd worry about that more. I think the regulators spend more time worrying about that than us cleaning up files from 7 years ago about know your customer, which we do and torches you all. And we haven't found one bad guy and spent billions of dollars. I think it's time that we be a little forward-looking. So I put cyber, The reversal of QE, I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but there's a chance that since we don't know what it did, we don't exactly know the reversal, inflation is a little bit higher, they have to raise rates faster, you're all going to get scared, the market's going to get rattled, banks can't intermediate like they used to, and that might be a little rockier than people think.
Another question about on the climate issue. Questioner says, what can Jpmorgan Chase and private industry generally do to prod leaders to make meaningful and long-lasting change?
And long what?
Long-lasting changes.
Yeah, well, listen, you've heard what we're doing here today. Like all these companies have corporates. One is run your business well. And most people do a pretty good job. And you're going to have failure. That's why it's called. I mean, if capitalism was so easy, we'd all have a 20% ROE with 10% growth every year. It's tough. It's a dog-eat-dog world sometimes. So my always tell people, the first thing is build a healthy, vibrant company. Then I can expand in Philadelphia. I can hire great people. I can invest in my businesses. And we invest relentlessly through thick or thin, serving clients, building our business. I could care less about quarterly earnings. But I think it is really important that business and government and civic society, not-for-profit, schools, participate, work together to collaborate in building our communities. And I don't think of those three groups, civic, business, and government, I don't think any two alone will win at it. I think you need all three, and which is what people do at a local level. You're trying to do in Philadelphia, and it works locally. This guy, James Fallows, wrote a book about it. He traveled in a small plane around America. He wrote it in the Atlantic. And he went to all these small towns in the Midwest, everywhere. A lot of them are booming. They're doing great. And he says the main reason is when you go there, the mayor, business, civic society are working together to fix the park, bring a business to fill that empty warehouse, get the school to teach the kids the jobs they need right there. And it works. Collaboration works. And I think business it always has. I think we have to be a little more aggressive in promoting the good things that we do, promoting the good things that capitalism does, getting involved at a local level, and participate in society. Like I said, most businesses do. I think we just have to do a little bit more. And they have to be a little bit less parochial. When we go to Washington, we can't always be pounding the chest about what's good for us. Because a lot of them do that. And you see it in a lot of tax loopholes, including carried interest, by the way. And it's not good. It diminishes us as a whole. And I see my friends do it. I see a lot of people do it. I think that certain policies, you can say, I'm going to do what's right for my country. If the country does better, everyone's going to benefit. And if you just find that one loophole that's going to help you a little bit, it gives the American people a great distrust of the system. Because right now they think it's rigged. They actually think it's not. But then they hear carried interest. They think, you guys think I'm getting carried interest? You probably do. If you don't know that, you say Wall Street carried interest. I don't. It's a handful of people, and it's got to be changed because it taints all of us. And so I just think we have to do a better job also doing public policy ourselves. So the Business Roundtable, where I'm the chairman, when I became the chairman, I stood in front of them and said, I am never, ever, ever going to talk about bank regulations in front of this group. We're going to talk about good public policy, and I want everyone we all need to be less parochial.
Are you describing?
We've got to promote immigration reform. That's also holding back our country, and it's tearing us apart.
You want to elaborate on that one?
Yeah, I think most Americans would do the following. Okay, we need proper border security. Did we have proper border security? We did not. When Reagan gave amnesty in 1986, 3 million people got amnesty, and we thought that Ronald Reagan, the Republicans would be tough. Never again. Now we have 11 or 12 million undocumented. So we need proper border security, whatever that means. I'd let the experts figure out how you go about that. And we need to let anyone who comes here and gets an education, like college or advanced degree, to get a green card and stay. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. They're going to build business here. They're going overseas to do it. Obviously, DACA should stay. Most people would give a path to the undocumented who've been tax-paying, law-abiding, but undocumented, which is most of them. Give them a path to legal status and citizenship over time. Make it hard, don't make it easy to do. Most people would vote for that, and yet we can't get it done. But that was, what I just told you, it was the Schumer-McCain bill, which the Senate passed and never got to the House for, I don't know the reason. And by the way, people, if you did immigration reform, we'd grow 0.2% a year faster. Tax reform, 0.2% a year faster. Infrastructure reform, 0.2% a year faster. Better education, 0.3. These economists have come up with these numbers. Those things are really bad.
Are you describing what some people call conscious capitalism, which is a change in corporate thinking, not imposed from government, but coming from inside?
Yes, but I'm not this. I don't want to be politically correct. I don't know what the hell they mean. The corporations I know have been doing this my whole life. Okay, and the standards have gotten higher, as they should. As standards should always get better everywhere. But yes, if that's what you mean, like being participating, helping, yes, I would agree with conscious capitalism.
Next question from the audience is, with respect to the new tax law, will middle and upper middle class families be happy or angry when they file their 2018 tax returns?
Middle class families?
Yep.
I think they'll be modestly happier because I think there are some benefits in there for them. If you were taking that state and local tax deduction, you're making over $500,000 a year, you will not be happy. But they did the right thing to get rid of that. There again, this state and local tax deduction went to 5 states. 80% of the cash benefit went to people making over $500,000 a year. Is that right? No, you should get rid of it. Of course, everyone's yelling and screaming in New York, all my clients, the real estate guys, they're wrong. We would never, New York City shouldn't be subsidized by Arkansas. And so I think they'll be better off. But the more important question, competitive business taxes are sine qua non for having a competitive international business environment. Doesn't affect local businesses. But if you have a choice to put a plant over there or a plant over here, a research center over there, there are returns were 50% higher. Okay? And studies show that 5,000 companies are now headquartered overseas that were headquartered here. We drove brains and capital overseas for 20 years, and it got increasingly worse. 20 years ago, the world was at 40%, we were at 40%. 20 years later, we're at 40%, the world came down to 20, within 5 points. And we needed to be competitive. And we needed to build the infrastructure. And again, like I said, I'd give the earned income tax credit. The only one left to help pay for this is to tax the rich a little bit more. But if you were on the richer side, my view would be if we did infrastructure right, education right, business taxation right, the big beneficiary is going to be you anyway. So get over it.
We've got folks who want to know your opinion on where we stand on Brexit and the president's China tariff policy.
So the president, I'll do the tariff first. The president is right about the issues he's raised about China. And for too long, and another area where American business was not particularly helpful to President Obama, because each one was trying to get their own ability to do business in China, but everyone thought it was unfair. But the business community is kind of united. He's right about tariffs, non-tariff barriers, state-owned enterprise subsidies, capital-type subsidies, and it's got to be fixed. Openness of market, like we can't buy 100% of a company there, they can buy 100% of a company here. Right to face the issues, process is not the right way. Tariffs doesn't the right way, it doesn't work. Quite predictably, you can have tit-for-tat tariffs, and I call it kind of a trade skirmish, but it increases the odds of a trade war. It reduces confidence, it reduces investment confidence, so I hope his method works. I'm not sure. I think it's made it riskier, but I'm wishing him success that he does a good deal. We're close to doing one on NAFTA. China, we're quite a ways away. Brexit will end up being a terrible mistake. And here's the, look, I'm not against the British people. It's up to the British people, because I've said this before, and they all get mad at me, like, go home, Yankee. They don't know what they voted for. And now you're starting to see it, which we've always kind of said is going to be much more complicated than you think. And so you have 3 choices. Remain, which there may be a vote. This may not be over. A soft exit, which essentially means they have to abide by regulations and laws coming out of Europe without participating, something in the budget, something to free movement of people, which is not really Brexit, to have a good trade agreement. And so it's a little bit of a, putting lipstick on the pig, or a hard Brexit. A hard Brexit would be an economic disaster, really complex. So it's not, what I think you see in the short run is a nothing burger. We hope that in November they announce they have an agreement in principle. They deal with the Irish border. They have a 2-year transition. The 2-year transition is so they can make the sausage. They're going to face the same issues at the end of the 2-year transition as we're facing now. And I don't know the outcome of that, but it may not be good.
Questioner says, Japan and European central banks have been holding down interest rates to support their economies. What do you expect will happen if they stop?
when the Japan and European central banks are bringing down, well, they're going to have to. The central banks of the world bought back $12 trillion. Some of that QE seems to have worked to help stabilize America. It has huge consequences that we don't understand. For example, when the savings rate goes lower, you may have to save more instead of spending, which reduces economic activity and raises uncertainty. So we don't know we're going to be studying QE for 100 years. But I do think it was a tool that stabilized the world, and the rest of the world used it. America's reversed. America's already selling $30 or $40 trillion a year, a month. And now we have an issue where the federal government is going to have to sell almost $250 billion a quarter. The Federal Reserve is going to be selling $150 billion a quarter. Huge change in supply and demand. And we know that the ECB sometime in 12 months will do the same. And then maybe Japan down the road. And yeah, that will have consequences. Hopefully, America's doing fine. Rates go up. We grow right through it, and it doesn't scare the hell out of people. But again, in the back of my mind, I don't know the full effect of that, and you have to be prepared for it. We prepare for everything, by the way. So we don't guess at the future. We prepare for all the possible bad outcomes so that we can continue to serve you no matter what happens out there. I want to point, you did mention the subject earlier. The United States deficit is now close to $1 trillion. It isn't clear that the taxes, by the way, is going to add to it. There are some arguments that it's starting to create growth, it's creating enough revenue to the government that'll make up for it. But forget that for a second. We have a little bit of an issue here. $16 trillion of net debt, a $20 trillion economy. Okay, over time, the 16, call it like 80%, will grow to 95%, and 115%, and then 135%, but it looks like this, like a hockey stick. So again, it's not an immediate crisis. We can easily handle 80%. We can handle 90%. But at some point in that curve, it won't work. There will be a little bit of rebellion. So always analyze a problem. That curve is not taxation. It's the deficit. But most of that increase is from spending due to medical. So another thing I should have said about negative productivity, 20% of our GDP almost on medical. Twice the other developed nations of the world. That's a staggering number. Now, some of it's good because you have better health, better medical, better pharma, better things. But you know what? We don't really have better outcomes than the rest of the world. So, we have too many uninsured, too many things overutilized, too many things underutilized. 30% of all that expense is fraud and administrative costs, and it should probably half that. So you look at these things, and we have to fix them. And I put that in the list of negative productivity and why we're growing slow, too. It's good for the medical profession, not great for the United States. But my point about the deficit, it's fixable. We got to actually start working it now, and the sooner we fix it, the better. It's just not going to cause the crisis of the day.
The growth of the deficit is, as you say, the major contributor is the cost of medical expenses, the escalation of the cost of medical expenses. Population is getting older, so that can be anticipated to continue. Does a Medicare for all system make that better or make that worse?
My view would be, government doing everything, honestly, if you think the government can do a lot of these things well, just look at the DMVs, the Veterans Affairs. You're great at military. God bless the United States military, okay? But so I'm not against a single payer plan. It better be properly constructed. What you put in, what you don't put in, what goes to the marketplace, what goes to exchanges. So it's far more complex than just, Medicare for all. So take Obamacare, which I was not against, but the design of it didn't fix the problem. So in America, and again, big facts. How many people have insurance? No, not you. 275 million people. 275. Obamacare added 10 million through exchanges. And Medicaid, you can expand at will. That's not really anything special, okay? And I want to get health care to all our people, but it didn't fix the problem. And in some cases, it made it a little bit worse. There are fixes, and we're working with Amazon and Berkshire Hathaway. But look what I said. Drugs are overutilized and underutilized. Wellness programs aren't properly done. Fraud and administrative costs of 35%. End of life, got the number, something like 20%. And most people don't want a lot of that 20%. Okay, my parents and my grandparents died. My grandparents died suffering in the hospital with tubes, which they didn't want, but at the time, but we couldn't take them out. My parents, fortunately, died at home, with hospice care. Studies are now showing that with hospice care, not forcing it on you, offering you the choice. You can still go get more medicine and more X, Y, Z, or the tougher chemo, or all these tougher things, that the people who stayed home spent 35% less on medicine and lived longer. They had a better end of life because they were with their family, enjoying a meal maybe, and when you want to attack big problems, you really better get a lot of people in a room and start analyzing exactly what works. Obesity is driving a huge amount of cancer, diabetes, stroke, heart, and depression. I mean, you think we do something about diabetes. So yeah, Medicare for all is not going to fix those problems, and it'll still kill us. So I'm not against it, just design it properly.
Last question. What is the one thing that you learned this year? What nugget of wisdom would you want to share with us in Q4 and for the new year?
In Q4. Here's my one nugget of wisdom. If you just listen to me for a while, some things are really complicated. We got to stop Democrats and Republicans and simplifying and do the work and roll up our sleeves and figure out solutions that work for everybody. So my one thing, there is no one thing. Folks, thank you very much.